So the entire FNAF community is falling apart right now. Everyone is choking, everyone trying to figure out their version of the game story. And the thing that I've come to the conclusion of for a while now is that FNAF doesn't have a story. I'm going to give my stances on this, then Luminous is going to give her stances on this, and we have two completely different mindsets about it, so I'm going to give mine first. My thing is, I see Scott much like a manga writer. When it comes to writing mangas, the people who write them are usually doing them on the fly. It's not like an American comic book where you plan things out 6 months in advance and you have to constantly switch between writers. It's usually a passion project done by one guy over the span of years, and it's mostly just improvised. Akira Toriyama had no idea where Dragon Ball was going to go, and could have never predicted what was going to happen later on in the Saiyan saga when he was writing the Piccolo saga. He wrote it story by story, arc by arc. He only knew when things were going to happen about the same time that you knew when things were going to happen. And honestly, I see the hallmarks of this with Scott, and I see all the same problems of writing a story like that with Scott. So when it comes to the first game, the only bit of story was pizzeria shut down, kids killed, maybe stuffed in suits, and that's it. Everything else is just Easter eggs. Just little Easter eggs. Phone guy, he's just there as a tutorial to get you used to the world. Fucking Golden Freddy, an Easter egg. The posters on the walls, Easter eggs. It was just made to make the game look creepy. I don't think the game was ever intended to have a story at that point. So when we get to games like FNAF 2, FNAF 3, FNAF 4, and onward for all the original Scott games, people continue to try to find the story. But without dragging this video on for an infinite amount of time, the only story that you can gloss from these other games is what's told to you in the mini-game cutscenes. If it isn't an arcade game cutscene, an Atari flashback, whatever you want to call them, then I don't care. I don't care if you think this might be happening in the background, or if this animatronic caused a bite of whatever. All I see is kid get bit by fucking Freddy. I don't care if you think it's Foxy. I don't care if you think it's Mangled. I don't care what you think. I saw the kid get bit by Freddy. Freddy did it. That's how I see the FNAF timeline playing out. There was a guy who was purple, he put on a bunny suit, he killed X amount of kids in multiple locations, then he died, then he came back as a bunny suit killer zombie. Then he is finally killed by his co-worker Henry, all the way at the end, and burned alive. The end. That's the whole FNAF storyline. I don't care about which pizzeria place opened first. I don't care about what year it is. I don't care how many Freddys there are. I don't care which chica takes place where or who made her, because it's irrelevant. We know that there was a guy who made animatronics, a guy who made animatronics and killed people. They were business partners, and they eventually led all the way to the end game where they both die in a fire. That's all you need. That's all you need for these games. Like, these games are not deep. They're not RPGs. They're not MMOs. They are just simple point and click horror games. Why do we need a grand Lovecraftian epic? Why do we need Phasgoo? Why do we need animatronics digging themselves out of the ground? Why do we need time-traveling ball pits? The more and more that we try to argue about things that we cannot even confirm exist, especially from the books, the more and more we go far away from where we started with the FNAF games. My end thought is the original games that Scott made are in their own canon. They're all things made by him, and the only things that can be confirmed are the things he directly tells you in the game. Every other game that Steel Wool or whoever has made, all the modern fully 3D games like AR, VR, and fucking whatever else, Those games are in their own continuity. Yes, they take things from that, they take things from the books, they take things from wherever they want to, but they're their own thing and should be treated as their own thing. Whatever they say is canon doesn't have to reflect to Scott's things, because Scott's things are always going to be what he made. It's basically like how the Sherlock Holmes fandom ended up working. When Sherlock Holmes author ended up passing and more people took on the Holmes story because it was in the public domain, the Holmes fandom said that only what the original author wrote was canon, and then the other ones were in their own canons. That's how I see it. There's the Scott canon, and then there's everything else. And I don't really care how it all fits together, because it wasn't meant to fit together. But how do you feel about this, though, Luminous?
I think that there's just too many open plot threads, too many things that from every game gets retconned to where you can't just solve the story, because there is no real story, because the story is it's too jumbled. There's no clear timeline. It's impossible to tell when anything took place first, because even if you do confirm something happened first, who's to say something else in a later game doesn't come out and is like, actually, no, this happened first, and completely destroy everything, and completely destroy the narrative again. The first game had its simplest, with it telling you the most basic of the story, and having it just be that, and have Easter eggs for you to figure out the rest. It was the simplest, it was the spookiest. I liked that one the most in the game timeline, because it works the best. The second game is also fine, although there's a lot of issues, and you can tell it starts from it originally supposed to be a sequel, but then going back to be a prequel, and I think that's kind of where it starts to fall apart, because it helps with the narrative more, but there's also issues throughout that. And then when we continue, we get up to the third game, which is fine, but then the fourth game makes it so that's all a fucking dream, and none of the first three games happened. And then there's Sister Location, which immediately goes back on the fourth game and goes, yeah, no, that stuff did happen, but also it was all a dream. It did happen. It's like, this is fucking stupid. There's no storyline here. And there's so much stuff from each game that goes back on itself. There's no point in arguing in what's real and what's not, because honestly, from any way you look at it, anything could be true. Until we have Scott come out and give us a definitive timeline, there's genuinely no reason to rack your brain trying to understand the story and lore of FNAF, because it's just not there. You have a pile of mud with some rocks in it that could lead you to an actual story, but there's too much there. It's too much of a mess. You can't understand anything that's there because there's too many parts that are left over and changed. So it's better just to not even bother, because you're just going to get constant fighting, because you think you're going to solve it, and then someone else is going to come out and it's like, here's this crazy new theory I have for this thing that happened. And then you're going to go back and be like, okay, but I like that theory, but if I do, that completely destroys my timeline entirely and I have to redo it. And like Shed says, with the new games, they're basically in their own continuity compared to the older games. Like, it's honestly, I think, probably best to just have them, like, broken off into segments and have them each be their own version. Where one ends at the fourth game with it all being a dream, one that somehow continues it from there, and that the kid was bitten, and there's a sister location, and his sister died, and all this stuff, and we just go all the way up to Afton still being alive for some fucking reason, because he always comes back. Honestly, don't even just bother with it. And stop bringing the stupid books into it. The books are so nonsensical. If you do bring them into it, you're just going to have even more issues trying to understand the timeline.
So basically, the game was rigged from the start. There was never a timeline, there was never a story, there was never anything. The reason why everything is left so vague is because Scott, for a while, has planned for the movie to come out, and for the books to come out. And you can't contradict the games if there is no plot in the games. The books loosely follow the games, and the movie is going to follow the games. I think the reality of it is that Scott made everything vague so he could fill it in later material. He doesn't care if the games make any sense, because he has greater ambitions. And I would say, pay attention to the movie, because the movie is going to be the definitive story of FNAF. You don't need to watch a 26-hour-long MatPat video. Just wait for the movie to come out. It's filming right now, and you will actually get a coherent story and timeline, hopefully. But yeah, that's what I think at the end of it all. FNAF has no story.